Today is from the book of Matthew, chapter 1. This is part of the genealogy of Jesus, verse 5. Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed, the father of Jesse. The second reading is from the book of Joshua, chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. Rahab and the spies. Then Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. "Go, look over the land," he said, "especially Jericho." So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. The king of Jericho was told, "Look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land." So the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab: "Bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land." But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. She said, "Yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they came from." The word of God for the people of God.
So last week we started this sermon series through the season of Advent based on the genealogy of Jesus, which we find in the Gospel of Matthew. And we have 42 generations that are listed there. And in those 42 generations, there are 5 women who are lifted up among all of the fathers who are listed there. These 5 women are lifted up. Last week we talked about Tamar and her story out of the Old Testament. And today we're looking at Rahab, and then we'll look at Ruth and Bathsheba, and then finally we'll take a glance at Mary as well. This has been an unusual sermon series, enough so that more than one person has asked me, "Larry, did somebody tell you you had to do this, or did you pick this on your own?" Well, I did this on my own, but it is a little bit unusual. So a question I'd like to ask you this morning as we start, though: have you ever been an outcast? Have you ever been in a situation of being an outcast? Have you ever been the person that nobody wanted to be with and people avoided? Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you were the person that other people were talking about, mostly behind your back? Have you ever been in a situation where you were the person that people were laughing at or about or making jokes about? Have you ever been the person who experienced the rejection of other individuals? I never really have known that to any real extent in my life. As kids, we all probably have that from time to time. There was a brief period of time after I was appointed a superintendent that you kind of have leprosy for a while, but it wears off. It is a little bit shocking, People do avoid you. You sit down someplace and nobody sits down beside you. You walk into a conversation and everybody shuts up. But like I said, that wears out after a little while, and they realize you're still going to be here. But a few weeks ago, Teresa and I ran across this wonderful, delightful movie. It's out right now. It's called Wonder. And it's a story about a little boy who lives kind of in this world of being rejected and as an outcast. It's based on a novel. It's a story of a little guy by the name of August. They call him Augie in the movie, Pullman. And he's getting ready to go into the 5th grade. And Augie was born with a very, very unusual but very severe facial deformity. And in his little life, he's had 27 surgeries to do various forms of correction. Some of them were life-threatening. Many of them were just to help his appearance. And he has lived kind of this sheltered, withdrawn life over the years. He goes around most of the time wearing an astronaut's helmet to hide his face. And the movie talks a lot about kind of how he sees the world from his perspective as a little boy who will walk into a crowd and it parts like the Red Sea. And, people step back and they just look and they stare and they know it's rude, but they can't really help it because of the way he looks when he's out in public. And the movie is about the transition that he's about ready to make. He's been homeschooled all of this time. And now his mom really feels like, you know what, Augie, you're going to have to go to public school. And so they live in New York City, and he's going to a private public school, and he's going to public school for the very first time. And his mother, while insisting that he does it, is also just scared to death for the little guy because she knows, the world can be a very cruel place, and he's experienced too much of that already. And so it's just a wonderful story about rejection and about bullying. It's a wonderful story about acceptance and overcoming that and learning to embrace that. And it's just a wonderful story about redemption, about how broken things get claimed and put back together again and rebuild. It has a great ending. Today the story is about a woman by the name of Rahab, and Rahab happens to live in Jericho at the time in the biblical story when the Hebrew children, the Israelites, are leaving the experience of the Exodus. They've been in the wilderness now for 40 years. They're standing on the edge of the promised land. They're getting ready to cross over the Jordan and to begin to take the land that is there. Now, the land that is there is already occupied by people, and so they're going to fight for it. And they've already done a little bit of that, and they're experiencing the conflict that's going on. And all of the people across the Jordan are very, very frightened of them. They've heard of this mass of people who are moving together and who are conquering kingdoms as they go along. Jericho has a famous story with it, the walls coming down and that type of stuff. That's kind of wrapped into this. But before the Israelites crossed the Jordan, as the story says, spies are sent out to kind of tell who's here and what are they doing and what are we against in this. And a couple of them wind up going into the city of Jericho. Now, when they go into Jericho, I'm sure they walk around a while, but they land here at the home of Rahab. And Rahab's vocation is she is a prostitute. And so a couple of strange guys going into her house probably isn't all that unfamiliar. But we realize that they've been kind of discovered. And so Rahab, rather than turning the spies over to the king who comes to question, says, you know what? I'm going to hide these individuals. And she's not doing it strictly for goodwill. She's doing it because she wants a favor. Because if you read the story, Rahab believes that the God of the Israelites is the God of all gods, is the God of the world, and that no one is going to stand in opposition to that God. And Rahab wants to be on the winning side rather than the losing side. And so she hides these spies so that they don't get caught. And then as she is releasing them from the city, she lets them down through the wall. As she's releasing them, they have this exchange about, well, what can we do? And Rahab's very clear about what I want. When you come and conquer Jericho, I want to be spared. And I want my family to be spared. I don't want us to die as a part of that. And so I've helped you. So I've given you a favor, and now I want a favor back. And the two spies agree. They give her a symbol, a sign, and they say, you do this, and we will guarantee that everyone who is in your home, when we attack the city, they will be spared. But if you can't get them into your house, then the deal's off. Just the people, your family that's in your house with you, they will be spared. if you read on through the rest of the story and you get to the 6th chapter of Joshua and you go through the fall of Jericho, there is this interesting section there where the 2 spies that were with Rahab are sent into the city. And they do spare her, and they spare the life of her and her family. And there's this wonderful verse that says, "And Rahab lives with the people unto this day." Now that was a long time ago, and she died a long time ago. And we read that in other places as well. But it's interesting, the story. And you know what? When you read the Bible a lot, I would love, and I never have been able to, I can't figure out why God chooses certain people to do certain things. You look at the whole Bible story and it just doesn't make sense from my perspective, and I don't think it makes sense hardly from anybody's perspective. I mean, there's all kinds of different ways, and I thought there were lots and lots of very, very virtuous women in Jericho. And yet God chooses Rahab, this woman she's an outcast. I mean, cultures were different and societies were different, but that's still not a vocation that's very honored in any society, really. And so Rahab was an outcast in her town. She was an outcast in her city. And yet, God chooses Rahab, and her family will be the only survivors among this great city of Jericho when it's overthrown by the Israelites. There's something that's embedded so deeply in the Scriptures, and it's in this story that we're all a part of right now. And that is this incredible understanding of the redemption of God. And by that I simply mean this: God didn't care what Rahab's history was. It didn't make God any difference, because God knew, I can redeem that. I can fix that. God doesn't go back and change the history and retell the story. But God knows that I can forgive that. I can transform that. I can use that in the future in the purposes that I have for an individual. And there's this marvelous sense of that I think undergirds this whole Christmas season. We talk about Christmas as kind of this unique time in the midst of when people do things they don't normally do, and generosity grows during the season of Christmas. Everybody knows that. Charitable giving goes up, dramatically compared to what it is at other times, and people live with more hope. And at the base of that hope is this clear and definite understanding that God is not done with us yet. And what that also means is it doesn't matter what you brought into the situation. God is never going to look at you and say, "Oh, you have really messed up, and you know what? I can't fix that." That's not it. There is no one on the planet who lives in those circumstances who God looks at and says, "Oh, wow, had you not done that, we might have been able to work on something. But because of that, we can't do that." That's just not true. It doesn't exist for anyone, for anywhere. And we pick up on that theme in some of our favorite stories of the holidays. It doesn't matter whether it's Charlie Brown or the Grinch or Ebenezer Scrooge. What do we talk about? We talk about these individuals and how something happens in their life and they're changed and they're transformed and they become remarkably different people. And that is the story of the Christian church for as long as it has existed. And that story has been told millions and millions of times by individuals just like you and me, who had things in their past and in their life which they thought separated them from God forever, only to find out they were wrong. and that the love of God is not withdrawn, but it claims them. And if there's ever a season for us to share that message, it is now. The story of Rahab is a story of a life that was changed and redeemed. And she is one of 5 women who are lifted up in this genealogy of Jesus. And thousands of years later, we tell her story. And folks, if that's not redemption, then I don't know the meaning of the word. And if you think you're any different than Rahab, I just want to tell you, you're wrong. You're wrong. I don't care what it is that you don't like about you. I don't care what it is that you're ashamed of. I don't care what it is that is your secret. It's not a secret from God, and God claims you in the midst of it. In John, the gospel, as we prayed the invocation this morning, we touched on that verse that's so familiar, John 3:16 and 17. For God sent his Son into the world not to condemn the world, not to remind us all of how we've screwed up, but to save the world. And every day to present you and me with a story that says, you know what? Today's a new day, and it doesn't have to be like yesterday. And it's a fresh start. I think there's a lot of reasons probably why God chose Rahab. But what is a comfort to me is that he did not choose her because of her vocation. Because redemption is at the heart of God, and it's the heart of this season. Jesus Christ, the hope of the world for all humanity. Would you pray with me? Gracious and loving God, Lord, nobody can do this but you. Nobody can tell the story that you can tell but you. Nobody can redeem us but you. And we can't make you do that. You do it because you love us. And you dream a dream about each and every one of us. And you want us to live that dream. And so, Lord, we just say thank you for coming into this season of the year and speaking a profound truth for us to hear. That you are the God who redeems us and makes us whole. In your name we pray. Amen.